someone fundamentally who's just always pursued my boldest and dearest dreams. And what's driven me is seeing a world the way I think it should be and going out and doing everything I know possible to make it happen. All of this comes from a deep-seated passion and belief that we're living in a day and age where you can make your boldest dreams come true.
Well, I want to dive right into this, and really my whole thing that I want to talk to you about is horseshit. I really want to dive into that. How many of you even know what I'm talking about at that moment? You have to probably be like deep into Peter's world to understand that conversation. But
should I tell a story?
Yeah, let's drop into it.
So there was this massive environmental disaster that was occurring about 120 years ago. And people were looking at the rate at which horseshit was building up inside downtown cities. And if you look at the growth rate of metropolitan regions, what we realize is that over the last 200 years, people have been moving out of the rural areas, out of the countryside, and into the cities because that's where the jobs are, that's where the entertainment is, that's where the education is, and it's this massive movement that's been going on for some time. It's going to change, by the way. It's going to change significantly over the next 20 years. I can explain why in a little bit. But the predictions back in the late 1800s were the population growth rates of Chicago, of Detroit, of New York, of all these major cities was growing, and people were bringing their motive power with them. They were bringing their horses. And so an affluent couple might have a couple of horses, and as the people came into the cities, the horses came in, and the horse droppings came in, and they would pile them up. Literally, they'd have lots on the corners of different city blocks where they'd pile the horse shit up.
Right.
And when it rained, the runoff would come down, it would bring disease, and it literally changed the architecture. And there were stories being written in the newspapers that said, listen, at this current rate, the number of horses and the amount of horse manure is going to grow exponentially, and we're heading towards an environmental disaster.
Right.
And then something happens. What happens? The car gets invented. And the car basically becomes the new motive force, and the horse population falls off a cliff, just like we've seen
drastically
over and over. Yeah, drastically. I mean, I have this great example of the drop of film photography for Kodak, right? Digital photography goes up like this, and film photography goes zap, just like Blockbuster and Netflix, like horses and cars. What we're going to see in the next 7 years is internal combustion cars that you drive and electric autonomous cars. You know, you're gonna get rid of your car, you're gonna junk your car, you're gonna sell your car because an electric autonomous car is 10 times cheaper and better, and so car ownership will be dead. Lots of implications there. So ultimately, the point you made, Wes, is really important, which is that we see problems way out there. Our brains are meaning-making machines. You guys know that, right? And what we do is we see a few patterns out there, and we see the problem in the future, and we accelerate it to today. And what we forget about is that when we see a problem that's 10 years out, 20 years out, we accelerate to today, we forget that we're going to be having exponential growth of tools to solve problems over the next 10, 20 years, and we ultimately solve those problems, and we are always skating ahead of the curve, and which is one of the things that gives me great hope for humanity.
I was going to say, is this where your optimism is like rooted? Is in that principle?
It's rooted in three major things. One is the realization that our tools for solving problems have been outpacing our animal mind, our linear amygdala that's seeing the problems and accelerating them. The second thing is that the number of people looking to solve problems far outstrips the number of people trying to cause problems. I would posit that at 1,000 to 1, right? And I would say that that notion that entrepreneurs today, like yourselves, what you think of an entrepreneur does is someone who finds a great, juicy problem and solves it.
Right.
And so the number of people trying to find problems, like okay, what's the problem I'm going to solve? What's the problem I'm going to solve? Okay, I don't need another photo sharing app. How am I going to solve, women's safety in Detroit?
Right.
And I teach this at Singularity University, that the world's biggest problems, the world's biggest business opportunities, want to become a billionaire, help a billion people. And so that's the second thing that gives me great hope.
Okay.
And the third thing is this concept of radical transparency, that it's getting harder and harder and harder to do anything in secret, right? I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cameras pointing at us right now that I know of.
There's a secret one up there.
Okay, 6. And in the future, everything is going to be imaged. We're all going to have augmented reality glasses on that's got 4 or 5 cameras looking forward-facing, micro drones in the air, dozens of satellite constellations, millions of drones flying above, delivering stuff, all imaging everything, autonomous cars generating 750 megabits of data per second for every single car going down the street. There will never be a moment in time that's not being imaged and watched, and that data going someplace. So you do something wrong, you're screwed.
Yeah, right?
And so
Snapchat's just the start, everybody.
I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
I have to teach my kids, number 8, I have to teach my kids that they are living in a world where radical transparency means they have to up their moral and ethical game.
And that's and to put a timeline on that, I mean, let's talk about connectivity, humans being connected. We're at what, 4 billion, 3 billion?
We're about 3 billion right now. So
Yeah.
2010, the number is 1.8 billion people connected with reasonable bandwidth.
Right.
Today, it's about 3 billion. Looking at the projections, by 2022 to 2025, that 3-year window, we should be at every person on the planet connected.
Right.
So we've got a few different systems being deployed right now. On the ground, what's really exciting, you got 4G or LTE giving you 10 megabits per second. My friends at Qualcomm, Paul Jacobs, Matt Grob, and that team there are giving us 5G. And 5G is going to be epic. It's going to be gigabit to 100 gigabit connection speeds. So I mean, you've got your phone has got now 1 million times the bandwidth that your phone had, your mobile phone had a decade ago.
Right.
And a gigabit, right, to 100 gigabits. And by the way, these LTE base stations now can not only just return that, but they can return data from 100,000 sensors per city block. So everything is being measured. There is nothing you cannot know. 9, 10 cameras, okay. There's nothing you can't know. And then you've got Google Loon, you've got Facebook with drones and satellites, you've got Samsung, you've got OneWeb with 900 satellites. They just got a $1.2 billion investment from SoftBank. You've got Elon with a 4,000 satellite proposed constellation. You've got terabit satellites. So we're literally going to be bathing the planet. If you wanted to get away someplace, you're screwed.
Yeah.
I mean, the Himalayas.
Is this why you're trying to get to Mars so quick? It's like, I cannot be.
We're going to have gigabit connectivity at the peak of the Himalayas. I mean, you do have the option to turn off your device, right? You do have that option. But there's no place that's not connected and no one who's not connected, which means you've got 8 billion people now online. Now, here's the beautiful thing. 8 billion people, not like you and I came online at 9,600 baud, or maybe whatever, but they've got access to, Google. They've got access to the world's knowledge. They've got access to the ability to spin up 1,000 processor cores or 1,000,000 processor cores in AWS. They have access to all the AI they need. So what do 8 billion people, 3 billion new minds, and actually 5 billion new minds, we're at 3 billion people today going to 8 billion, so 5 billion people coming online in the next 7 years.
Collective knowledge.
What are they going to manufacture, produce, consume? What problems are they going to solve? Right? And these are 5 billion people around the planet now entering the global economy. And by the way, if they're not your customer, they're your customer's customer. right? So if you're in the banking business, I tell the executives at banks, screw building bank branches. Who gives a shit about a bank branch?
Right.
You're going to need apps, probably on blockchain.
Yep.
If you're in the insurance business, you're not having insurance salespeople. You're having apps that are doing that. So every single person is going to need education, is going to need healthcare, is going to need banking, is going to need insurance, is going to need all the things that you want to give them. So it's a massive explosion in the global economy.
Right.
And by the way, if this has been the growth curve of innovation, I guess from your perspective, if this has been the growth curve of innovation, now think of it going like this. Because 5 billion new minds are now solving problems with access to quantum computing in a couple years. Yeah. I mean, it's going to just be awesome.
It's in such a short period of time. And we're celebrating the 10-year anniversary this September of the iPhone, for example.
And does it feel like 10 years or does it feel like forever?
It's a mixture. Sometimes I'm like, it feels like yesterday that I had my first E phone that barely could open a website. Now I'm like slamming my phone against a wall backstage you're like, why do I only have 2 bars? We are going to see this exponential growth, and yet it's happening in such a short period of time. And so that's why I wanted to start this conversation, because there's so much negativity that surrounds the world. Especially in the entrepreneur field, there's just so much negativity that we see constantly. And this optimism that you bring to the table is so fascinating to me. It's actually the thing that draws me to you the most, past all
It's not my good looks.
That's second.
Okay, thanks.
So, but I don't know, actually probably our Star Trek connection is second. So the good looks is third, sorry. But it's this optimism, because you see so much of the tech, there's so much negativity around robotics and AI and the possibility that humanity is going to be dwarfed by this thing. You've got the horror stories, and science fiction has obviously fed that narrative. So as you look at it with all of this, how are we going to stay human? How are we going to maintain the humanness of who we are and still live in this world of connectivity?
So one of the questions is, what is it that makes us human? Right? I mean, this is a question that I ask myself. I have 2 5.5-year-old boys, and so I see the perspective of life through their eyes, and I love it. But what makes us human? Is it our creativity? Is it our propensity for love and connection? And when we say this is human, do we say it's the 10 trillion cells in our body that make that possible? Is it the 100 billion neurons, the 100 trillion synaptic connections? Is it our spirit? What is the thing that we define as human and the attributes we define as human? And could those not be humanistic, and could those not be resident in a complex, quantum-driven AI computer? I don't know. I think you have to understand, guys, something very interesting, right? We are so egocentric, right? The universe,
as a species, or this room?
Not this room. As a species, the universe revolves around us, right? So go back hundreds of years and thousands of years to pre-Copernican, what do I call it? Solar system, universe. We used to think the Earth was the center of everything. And of course, then we say, no, the sun is the center. And then we discover our sun is actually a rather minor G-class star in one galaxy, right? And we find out that, oh my God, there are 100 billion stars in our galaxy. And until last year, there were 100 billion galaxies in our universe. Today, we find out there are 2 trillion galaxies in our universe. So we're becoming less and less significant, less and less at the center. And then we say, oh, but planets are rare, and we're a rare planet. Bullshit. We're finding planets all over the place. We're finding planets are everywhere. And I bet we're going to find out that life is everywhere.
That was my next question.
I think life is ubiquitous. Right. But let me just finish. So the question is, okay, we're not that special as a star. We're not that special as a galaxy. We're not that special as a planet. We may not be that special as a specific organic life form, but I mean, what makes us believe that to be intelligent, to have spirit requires, DNA or carbon or whatever? Why can't the technology we're creating also be equally spiritual and equally humanistic?
I don't think I've ever heard you say that.
I haven't. I'm saying that right now. Yeah. but there's this pattern that we repeat over and over again where we realize, yes, we love what we are and who we are in the universe, but we don't have to be unique in that capacity to enjoy and appreciate what we have.
That's such a... Like, I'm just thinking about the concept of, spirituality and AI and robot. It's just like, it's new in my mind right now. I'm processing this, and I'm sure others are looking through this. But the way that you broke that out, it's so relative and really does ground us in that.
So saying we're special, but do we have to be unique?
Right.
And can't we be special with everybody else who's special alongside of us?
Right. And so let's just dive into this a little deeper. You're talking about, now we know we had 2 trillion, all this. So in your scientific and all the research that you've done, it would make sense that there are obviously, we can't be a 1 in a 2 trillion, right? Or could we?
I know. So listen, I believe that life is ubiquitous in the universe. I think that as a function of increasing or balancing of entropy, we see energy and information states getting compressed. And I don't see anything unique about our star, or anything unique about our planet, or anything unique about our planetary system that's in the Goldilocks zone, or that water exists, or anything that would say, oh, Earth is uniquely a place. The more we learn about the universe out there, the more we realize that there are probably many Earths.
Yeah.
And many Earths in this Goldilocks zone where liquid water could exist on the surface, and therefore we could see this kind of a biology. And then when we look out in the interstellar medium, this was the work I did as even a freshman and sophomore, we see all the building blocks of life, from amino acids to nucleotides, in the interstellar medium. It's out there at very low chemical interaction rates, where a molecular bond may take 1 million years to form, but over the course of, what are we now, theoretically 14.5 billion years old,
right?
They form. So I think as we head out towards Mars, as we head out towards Europa, and we can talk about the fact that I think it's going to be, private companies like my company, Planetary Resources, or SpaceX, or Blue Origin that does it versus the governments, because they become too risk averse. But at the end of the day, we're going to discover life. And yes, maybe we're the only multicellular intelligent life, or maybe it exists in the oceans of Europa. But the question is, where is all of the life? This is, the paradox, if you would, of where is all the intelligent life. And we can talk about that. And I'll very quickly go to the fact that we're living in a simulation anyway, but that's a deep dive.
There's so much fun. Oh, I love that clock tells a lot of time.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you this bluntly. What does it mean to you to be human?
I think what it means to me is to have dreams, aspirations, to love, to struggle, to grow, to appreciate, to grow. I said to grow already. I mean, those are the elements that, to be creative. I love the notion of being creative. To have a passion, and I think those elements that are the elements that make me wake up and be alive and love my life and what I do. And just last month, an AI wrote a orchestral symphony that was awarded this award before I don't have the details, I apologize, I just heard it last night, before the awarding body found out it was an AI that wrote it.
Wow.
Right, so I think we're going to have the best films written by AIs, the best novels written by AIs, the best music and artwork created by AIs. I think that will happen. And
is that going to be AI generated, or the creativity of the human implanting it in the AI? How much
I think
of that?
It will be AIs learning and modeling and understanding, and then at a scale so massive and unknowable by us, recombining and creating things that are unique and novel, but are viewed by us as being beautiful. Now the question becomes, at the end of the day, will that be thought of as valuable or not.
Right.
If something is beautiful, if you love it, if it inspires you, if it's, oh my God, that's the best piece of artwork or music or film I've ever seen, does it diminish the value and the love that you have if it was written by a computer and not by a human? Or do you appreciate that program more? I mean, these are the conversations that we're going to have not in 10 or 20 years, like in the next 2 to 5 years, that we're going to be struggling with and discussing. Number 11. So
we just had this conversation before you got on with mutual friend Dr. Shafali, and this principle of labels, and that was brought up by one of the audience members, and it just hit me, and this is like a new thought that just came into my head, is that as a species, do we limit ourselves by labeling us as a human? You know,
yeah, I think we are an intelligence, first and foremost.
Which goes against the name of the whole conference, but we'll go back to that. But this just hit my, you know.
But so there's an interesting question, right? We are human, we are humanity. When I plug my cortex, my brain, into the cloud, and just like your phone can upload to the cloud and have 1 billion times more memory, 1 billion times more functionality, when I do that, and I'm 99.999% silicon intelligence or quantum intelligence, and 0.001%, but I'm still here, am I less human than before? Am I something new? Am I a new species? What am I? Because again, that is rapidly where we're heading towards.
Right.
We are incorporating technology into our bodies. We are offloading. We are very limited in our cognitive capacity. It all goes down to women's hips.
Okay.
A woman's pelvis can deliver a head of a certain size.
Okay.
And because of that, our brains are limited in a cranium of a certain size.
So if we opened up the cranium, it'd expand?
And so your brain undergoes, your neocortex of your brain undergoes these folding to increase the surface area and so forth. And about 2 million years ago, our prefrontal cortex sort of expanded and our brow expanded slightly, and that was the last software upgrade we had. But we're sort of stuck at this capacity. We have about 300 million pattern recognizer units, as Ray Kurzweil defines them, of 100 neurons each, and that's your memory capacity. When you've used them, you've used them. And Jim, who was on stage here before, is a dear friend, can show you how to start to use other parts of your brain with visual connections and auditory reconnections and so forth. But the fact of the matter is you have a limited amount of capacity. And so we're going to, and there are amazing people like Brian Johnson, who's one of my innovation board members and a dear friend and investor on my company's focus with this company called Kernel on how do you plug the brain into the cloud.
Right.
And so we're going to, we have a limited amount of memory on these and a limited amount of processing capability on this, as you do in your brain, and a near infinite amount that we can grow out there in the world. And we're gonna go beyond our skull.
So with that,
but am I less human if I do that?
Right. And I like I said, that just hit me. Are we? I think we could go in that for forever.
I think intelligence gathering is what you're heading towards.
Yeah, rebrand. But in diving into that, and you're talking about plugging our cortex into the cloud and going through that system. And in our last conversation, you and I talked about the collectiveness of that, right? That we now become a collective organism.
The kinder, gentler Borg.
Right. Which the Borg is an interesting. How many Trekkies do we have? I want to know how deep we can go into Trek. Like, do not be ashamed. Raise it high. Come on. How many people?
Please, anybody?
Come on. All right. So the Borg, to me, actually, they villainize them in the movies and in the storytelling, the narrative, and it's this species that travels across the galaxies, taking other species and putting them into their collective, okay, into the hive. And as I watched that as a child, I thought, well, actually, that might not be a bad idea, because there's a lot of idiots. There's a lot of people who are doing stupid stuff, and that solves that problem. And then you and I talked in this last conversation, we talked about the good, the evil, all these different things, and you said the consciousness, once we get to this collective consciousness, this collective cloud, that literally becomes something that, and I'm not going to steal your words, but let's dive into that.
So when I look at where we as a species are evolving to next, I look at how life evolved on this planet. Let me take you back 4 billion years. So as Earth, the star, our solar system formed about 4.5 billion years ago. That's the current theory. The Earth cooled down very rapidly. We were bombarded by comets and asteroids. And in fact, every ounce of water that you drink on this planet actually came from asteroids and comets. I don't know if you know that. We were a dry rock, got bombarded. These comets are 40, 50% water. These asteroids are 20 to 30% water.
And I learned that water is created in one specific section on the planet. I was watching some BBC thing. Like 90% of our fresh water comes from one particular...
Okay, but the original water that became brine and salt and covers our planet. And so about 4 billion years ago, it's thought the first life forms on this planet formed. Now, the first life forms are called prokaryotic life. They're a cell of a very simple bag of cytoplasm with strings of DNA in them. Basically, it's the most simple life form that you can form, a prokaryote. And then over the course of the next billion years, those prokaryotic cells incorporated technology into them to become eukaryotic single-cell life forms. They incorporated these things called mitochondria. Dave Asprey has a great book that's just out called Headstrong that talks about how do you strengthen your mitochondria, your energy sources of your body. And these mitochondria are very important additions. And then we formed nuclear membranes that allowed us to retain the DNA and be able to create chromosomes. And so we learned how to manage energy and data better inside of single cells by incorporating technology into them. The next thing that happened over 500 million years, we went from single cell to multicellular life forms. And then we crawled out of the oceans, and then we became you and me, right? You have a collection of 10 trillion human cells. 10 trillion cells make up you in tissues and organs and so forth. And so I think about this process of simple, incorporating technology, becoming multicellular, becoming conscious at a multicellular. I'm conscious as Peter, but each of these little cells here are individual life forms. And so I said, holy shit, the same thing is happening again now. You are the equivalent of that prokaryotic life, that very simple form of life. And we are incorporating this technology into our being.
Right. It's into our
identity. And we're becoming
soul.
eukaryotic. And once we do that, I'm now able to plug into the cloud, but I'm able to plug into your mind. And I can understand what you see, what you hear, what you feel. It's a level of intimacy like never conceived of before. I can watch the eyes of a sunset in Japan through, a young woman and see what she sees.
The empathy of humanity will go through the roof.
The empathy goes up, but we become conscious at a brand new level. Now, this kind of conversation is something usually takes me a few glasses of wine to get to. But the fact of the matter is, I think this is a direction that we're heading. I think we're becoming conscious on a new species-wide level. And then when we look out there in the universe, we're going to see that level. And when people say, I don't see life out there, I think this period of transition from the point at which we are a technological species to the point where we are becoming what I call a meta-intelligence, I think is a very short period of time.
Yeah, no, and it's fascinating. And when we stepped away, I thought of the single cell and everything you just talked about, and then my first mind was cancer, right? Which is a cellular attack. And looking at this consciousness and just kind of saying, like, how do we prevent the cancer of the collective, right? And I'm not saying we answer that now, but that was just where my head went, was that I see I see it. I see it in our youth. I see it in the way that we're utilizing technology. I said it, as Dr. Shefali was leaving the stage, how many people were on their phones, not participating in the presentation, how many people were on their laptops, and it's not 5 years ago. If you dared to pull out your phone during a conversation like this, there would be somebody next to you saying, hey, don't. But now it has become so embedded in us to be connected with so much more.
And wait till we've got augmented glasses on and you're basically half conscious anytime.
Yeah, and this is years ago, but beta tested the Google Glass. And we went down and did all that fun stuff, and we walked through Venice, and I had them on, and Jody was with me, and it was really creepy that I could watch everyone and record everyone. And she was like, what are you looking at? And I'm like, nothing. I'm looking at nothing, right? We're in Venice. So I'm just on the beach. I'm like, I'm looking at the clouds. It's all good. We went back and watched the video, and she's like, what were you looking at? You know, and it was just this creepy moment of being like, oh shit, what was I looking at? You know, and so there's so much that we're going towards, as you said, we have to be conscious of all of our actions with this, we call it Big Brother, all of this, but the brilliance and the reason that I really wanted to dive deep into this conversation is this is the human gathering, but what defines humanity?
Yeah.
What are we?
We'll find out. I mean, that's interesting, right? That as AI becomes so powerful, we will find out what human means versus AI. We may find out there is no difference. We may find out that AIs are as funny, as loving, as empathic, as artistic, as creative as any human, and then we redefine things. Or we may find out, oh, there is this unique thing that we humans can do that others cannot do. So we're going to explore and learn this fundamentally.
So here's a question, going back to Trekkie, Data. The whole conversation, his whole entire character, right? This AI life form that's created, his entire journey through the series is to be more human, right?
Yeah.
To have feeling. How do you think these
This
novelists...
is Commander Data, who's effectively an android who appears in the show to be human-looking. You see him as a pale skin, but he's got a positronic brain, and he's extraordinarily intelligent and is as close to a human as exists. But he clearly doesn't get the jokes, and he clearly doesn't get the
connectivity,
the
touch,
love, and so forth, but he so desires that. It's Pinocchio. It's a story of Pinocchio.
So, and for those of you, like, I wear a Trek ring every day of my life. Like, it's embedded in me. But the question there was, how do these novelists, how do these individuals, I mean, this is written years ago, in the 50s, 60s, were writing about this. Where do you think that inspiration comes from? And we've seen so many other novelists and storytellers in science fiction, because it seems to be so, you know, I mean, the joke is Star Trek is a documentary. You know?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We just, at the X Prize Foundation, we just created an X Prize Science Fiction Advisory Council of like the top 50 science fiction writers, living science fiction writers. And I've had a pleasure to get to know a number of the greats, from Arthur C. Clarke, who was the chancellor of my first university.
Yep.
And I've received the Heinlein Award. And these authors who explored the future and did it so prolifically and all trying to find unique niches were running experiments. They were running social, technological experiments going forward, in every experiment, so they weren't sort of encroaching in other people's universes. We're trying to be unique, and it's harder and harder to write, you know, very unique stories. But I think a lot of the work done by Asimov, by Heinlein, by Clarke, and others were spot on. And you know, I've gotten to know the Roddenberry family very well. Rod Roddenberry, who's the son of Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, and is one of our major donors at the X Prize Foundation, was our sponsor of our Visioneer Summit last year. And we've had the conversation that, you know, the Star Trek universe is sort of our business plan.
Yeah.
At X Prize.
Well, every time I feel like that, I feel like I'm on the Enterprise. I mean, it's very, very evident, yeah.
So I think that at the end of the day, the Star Trek universe had a most interesting attribute that I find fascinating. It was a universe that had no money in the original Star Trek. Money was useless.
Yeah.
So if you have, and we're heading towards that right now. I'm a libertarian capitalist, if I had to define myself, but we're heading towards a post-capitalism society where if I have technology that can develop and design and build anything I want, right? If I have a nanobot, a nano-robot that can manipulate atomic atoms and recreate a mansion for me, if you think about what it takes to build anything, from a Ferrari to a mansion to beautiful clothing to a perfect replica by the atom of a Van Gogh, it's three things. It's the raw materials, it's the energy, and it's the information.
Yeah.
And so we're effectively in a universe of infinite materials, right? The Earth, we have so much material resources on the Earth, but now if you include the asteroids, which my company Planetary Resources is working on, you've got 1 trillion times more materials for each of you that you want. All the platinum, all the, you know, all the materials you could possibly want, plenty of energy, right? And then the information becomes interesting and useful, but can you scan a Van Gogh and recreate the information, I mean, perfectly, and then replicate it? And then what's the difference if you have this Van Gogh and this one is the exact same atoms in the exact same place? Is it the same thing?
Well, I've said that about all the Vertucci, how do you say it? The whatever purses? I don't know.
Yeah.
Versace, thank you. The Versace purses. I don't know that
Well,
stuff.
this one cost, no.
Yeah, this one was $4,000 and this one was $20. What's the difference? I don't know.
The price tag.
The price tag, yeah. I don't know that stuff. Sorry, guys. This is where my head is. Let's
but
get some mics going around because
Yeah.
I know there's going to be a plethora of questions. So let's get some mic runners here in a second. This conversation and where you're going with X Prize, and obviously I think most of the audience understands the story of X Prize. Where do you see X Prize in the next 10 years?
So I want to have X Prize remain on the cutting edge of working on solving the biggest problems. We have an amazing CEO, Marcus Shingles, who's going to be speaking here later today. Very proud. He's one of my closest friends in the world. And last year, I went from chairman and CEO to a role of founder and executive chairman and brought Marcus in because I was just doing way too much and X Prize was getting too little of my attention, and Marcus is 100% focused and really taking it in an amazing way. I want to see, one of my visions for where we go is that the world is identifying the biggest problems it wants solved, and then X Prize is sort of lobbing up the prizes to solve those problems.
Right.
I love that kind of an engine of, what does the world want solved? Boom, there's a $100 million prize or $1 billion prize, right, to solve those.
Did that inspiration at all, consciously or subconsciously, come from what you just said about the universe of Star Trek, this whole financial side of it? Because I look at superheroes and science fiction in the same way, and especially as a small child, I saw money was not the equation. It was the passion, it was the curiosity.
It didn't there, but it very much comes from, I see money as an energy source.
So it's one of the three.
Money is a means by which, when someone invests in you, they're transferring trust and they're transferring energy. And they're giving you that money to do something useful with. And I have an event here in January of a year. I have 360 CEOs. It's called my Abundance 360 program. And these are CEOs running $10 million to $10 billion companies. And I've committed to a 25-year journey with them. For 25 years, I'm on year 6 of this journey. I meet with this group, and we spend 3 days focusing on what's the technology going from deceptive to disruptive that they should be using to create wealth. But it's wealth in the service of changing the world.
Yeah.
Right? It's like this bullshit about I'm making money to make money means meaningless. And my goal is to say, okay, great, you're successful. Now what are you going to do with it?
Right.
What are you going to change? And so one of the things I'm going to tear about is I want to change the conversation of the giving pledge, which I don't agree with. This notion that give half your wealth while you're alive to a foundation. Yeah, that's great, but who gives a shit? I want it to become the impact pledge. Exactly. I want to say, okay, while you're alive, if you're a billionaire or wealthy individual, what are you going to solve? This is the shot, like, like pointing towards the fences where you're going to hit your home run. Yeah. While you're alive, put your reputation on the line, your wealth in line, and say, I'm going to solve, hunger in this country. I'm going to solve, healthcare in this. I'm going to help liberate women over here. Whatever it is you want to do, use your wealth to solve a problem. Yeah. Because if you're a great CEO, if you're a great investor, you developed a bunch of skills besides your money. And so, like Tony Robbins, who's a dear, dear friend, he's focused on helping feed 1 billion people. So all the books he writes, he just wrote an amazing book called Unshakable that I just finished. I love it. Please read it. It's like, I wish I'd read and known this stuff 30 years ago for how I invest my money. It's a one-day Audible. It's called Unshakable. Write it down, read it. It will make you millions of dollars passively over the next decade. Please take a second. Let me say it again. Read or listen to the book Unshakable.
Is that the one that just came out?
It just came out. It's a thin read compared to his, financial mastery book, which was, a long read.
Which was a Bible.
And every dollar that he gets from that book goes towards feeding people, right? So he's feeding 100 million people a year right now. He wants to up that to feeding 1 billion people over the next few years. Amazing.
One of our mutual friends, Keith Ferrazzi, and I sat down at brunch 2 years ago, and he asked me that question, the impact question, because obviously what we're working on, what we're doing is all about that. And he said, what's the goal? What do you want to do? And 25 is a very special number to me. So I said, I want to impact 25 million people on the planet. And it was very interesting. He looked at me and he said, is that what you want to do, or is that what people have said? And I said, well, I've had conversation, da-da-da. And he said, fuck them. It was his exact word. He said, what do you want to do? And my narrative changed, and it went to, I want to impact 1 billion people on the planet. And when the narrative changed in this conversation, I'm being vulnerable and having this conversation, is that the game I played changed. The risks that I was willing to take, the energy that I was exuberating, what came to me, like what the universe provided, the energy, you're talking about that, the resources, completely changed. The limited mindset of 25 million going to 1 billion, it's huge. I'm not naive to think that impacting 1 billion people on the planet is easy. But what happened has led us to this kind of conversation, is the things that we're going to be talking about tomorrow and announcing. There's so many things happening because of what you just said, of changing that. For those of you that were here for Tom Billy, who talked about his journey of money, right? And now where he's at.
Yeah, Tom is great. Right,
and there are people in this room that are making significant amount of money. But are you making money to make money, or are you making money to impact? I think it's huge. Let's grab some questions.
Question right here. Over here.
Can't see you. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Hi there.
Hey, Peter. Thanks for being here. So hugely inspired by your work, X Prize, Singularity University. I wanted to just go a little deeper on one of the 3 factors that you mentioned, specifically energy and the abundance of energy. And I think that everybody in this room is probably acutely aware that we have some challenges right now with energy. So I'd love to just hear your thoughts about what does that transition look like, to a real clean, abundant source of energy, and how does that really happen right now?
Sure.
In our current, global political ecosystem.
Great. So great question. Just to repeat it, what are my thoughts on the process of transitioning from the old energy economy to the new energy economy? Where are we now? Where are we going? How fast is it going to change? How do we deal with this White House and so forth? So let me be very clear. I have been, for the last 5 to 10 years, a huge advocate of solar and an all-electric economy, and I am 10 times more assured of that than ever before. And let me give you the details to back that up. So we have been, over time, transitioning from energy source to energy source, right? We were using whale oil at one point for lighting, and it was a very expensive source of energy. Then we went to kerosene and petroleum, and then all of a sudden we start to see petroleum getting a bit scarce, but then technology comes in and allows us to drill 5,000 feet below the ocean surface, and then 5,000 feet below the ocean floor, and 5,000 feet over, and we access huge oil reserves in the ocean floor. Technology took oil from scarce to abundant over and over again. And then natural gas becomes online, and then technology like fracking takes it from scarce to abundant, and now we're an energy exporter. And so energy wasn't scarce in that regard because it kept on giving us openings to more and more energy sources, but with consequences, right? It's going back to the consequence of the horse manure of the hydrocarbons we're pumping into the atmosphere. The beautiful thing is that we live on a planet that is bathed in 8,000 times more energy from the sun that hits the Earth's surface than we consume as a species in a year. So there's not a shortage of energy. There's plenty of energy, 8,000 times more energy than we need, a squanderable abundance of energy. It's just not in a fully usable form yet. But technology, again, is the force that takes what used to be scarce and makes it abundant. And so we're seeing that. We're seeing the cost of solar plummeting, right? We're seeing the efficiency of conversion of photons to electrons hitting new record highs every year. We're seeing the amount of energy entering the grid at 25% from renewables, and wind is, ahead of solar today. Solar will overtake it over time, and I think we're going to head towards an all or mostly solar electric economy. And a few interesting things. We're seeing countries like Costa Rica, the Netherlands, parts of the UK going to all renewables and making those claims. All of a sudden, we're starting to see a growing expectation in electric cars. And let me tell you, I used to think that petrochemicals were going to stick around. Why? Because we've got hundreds of millions or billions of cars out there that are going to be gas guzzlers. And these cars would be on the road for decades, right? How many, 1980 cars or 1990 cars are still on the road? They last for 20, 30, 40 years. And as long as they need petroleum, you're going to have the oil and gas industry going. But something's changed. And that is that the autonomous car is coming online, and all the plans for autonomous cars are electric autonomous cars. And those electric autonomous cars are going to be 10 times cheaper and 10 times better. When I say better, easier, no auto insurance, no driveway, no maintenance. It's there when you need it. You can have any kind of car on demand. It's car as a service. And so by 2025, right, what is that? 8 years from now, the estimate is car ownership is dead. A lot of millennials today are opting for Ubers versus buying cars anyway.
There's the bridge.
It's a 10% niche already. We're seeing every major car company scrambling to get to reinvent themselves as car as a service, because no one's going to be buying cars anymore. You're just not. And in fact, it's worse than that for the car companies, oil and gas companies, which is you're going to take your $80,000 BMW and you're going to throw it away. You're going to give it away, you're going to try and sell it, you're going to scrap it, you're going to park it, you're going to sell it for parts because it's so much cheaper to have an electric autonomous car that you just don't want it anymore.
Well, and then there's the hip factor that's snuck into that as well. It's cool to have that.
So all of a sudden, the long future tail of oil and gas is shut down. And so yes, we're going to need oil and gas for plastics and petroleum products and so forth, but they're fucked, I think is the final bottom line. Yeah, and so when the government stops being the
driver?
I value the support of NSF and EPA and NOAA and OSHA and all the government agencies to help, but if all of a sudden they're blocked and they're not able to, I much more expect entrepreneurs to come in and offer a product that's 10 times better for us, like getting rid of the horse and bringing in the car, and now bringing in the electric autonomous car, so that it's actually in our best interest. And so that's so much better when it's in our best interest to actually use the product and service that's better for us, and oh, by the way, it's better for the environment as well. So it's not laws driving this, you can't have on a whim someone change that. It's just everybody's choosing that because it's that much better for them. So when you've got that kind of alignment, everybody wins. Does that make sense?
Totally, and I guess the other part of that, you mentioned the current administration and the political barriers. I mean, can you comment on that? Because I think, you know, the disruption piece of it and the economics are one thing, but when the deck is stacked against those entrepreneurs and solar subsidies are going out the window.
Yeah, but no, this is a future where you don't need solar subsidies. You know, I love this. I'm on the board of Hyperloop One. I'm a founding board member, and I fly my plane out of Santa Monica into Nevada to go to the test site to see how they're doing. They've got their full up test track, which is going to be the Kitty Hawk moment is going to be coming online in the next few months. I can't say exactly when. But when I go in and I fly in with AJ or Cody or the team, you know, I'm overflying all these photovoltaic farms, right? These black solar panels, and then these solar thermal farms, right? Which are all these mirrors focusing the sunlight up at this tower of these molten salts. And they're beautiful, they're gorgeous.
The ones right outside of Vegas.
Right out of Las Vegas,
yeah.
And they're powering a lot of Las Vegas today. But when I fly back into LA, all you see is concrete and rooftops, and there's no place for that. But guess what? In Normandy this year, they just deployed a few kilometers of solar roads, and we're going to see Tesla deploying solar rooftops. And so we're going to turn every rooftop, every glass surface, every road surface into electron generating capabilities. And we're going to end up in a situation where you are incentivized to put it on your rooftop because you get free electricity. We're going to democratize, dematerialize, demonetize energy production, and we're going to make the grid safer by getting rid of it, right? I mean, we're living in a world where our grid is such a weakness.
It's a huge limitation.
Well, if there's ever an electromagnetic pulse and our grid goes down, everything goes down. Right? But imagine instead if you've got the ability to have solar produced every place. And oh, by the way, one of the key points about solar, the world's poorest countries
can now have energy.
Are the sunniest countries on the planet. Right? So you can see South and Central America, Africa, Middle East becoming massive energy exporters. So it's an interesting change. And I guarantee you the gameplay that the petrochemicals company, unless they're like just blinders on, they may be, they've got to know this is coming, right? Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Saudi, all know this is coming. They've been investing massively in this area.
Well, and I think to the point, you know, and I'll speak to it, is the White House and the, government. I personally believe.
Oh, but the coal miners, we got to save the coal miners. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, China. We got to battle that with China. But no, I really believe, and you call this as well, the Crisis News Network, right? Every time you turn on the news, it's negative. Every time you see anything, it's negative. I personally believe that what you're talking about it's coming, and those that are seeing it are believing it, that it's coming. And the only way to distract the conversation is to create more chaos over here. And that's my personal belief. And so again, as entrepreneurs, I hate when I hear entrepreneurs say there are limitations because of a policy. Like that is so anti.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's great if you can partner with government.
Yes.
But do not be limited. It's a big planet out there.
And
lots of governments.
I think there's a lot of noise being created in certain spaces because they see this coming. It's inevitable. Let's grab some more questions.
Right here.
Okay, go ahead.
Hey, Peter. You talk about the connected world growing at scale and effectively creating like a planetary nervous system. I wonder, what do you see the changes in the entrepreneurial landscape come from that?
So the question was, as we're growing the connections on the planet from 3 billion to 8 billion, and we're wiring the planet with wireless 5G and fiber optic, and we're creating this nervous system, right, where we're connecting every node, you and me and 8 billion people. What's the implication to entrepreneurship? The implication is huge because we're about to get 5 billion more entrepreneurs online and 5 billion more customers online. And so when I think about this, people in Africa, in India, who have been battling to survive. They are entrepreneurial by nature. Their entrepreneurship is, how do I feed my family today? And having to make it up as they go along. They're going to get access to the world's best healthcare digitally, right? We're democratizing and demonetizing healthcare, and we're democratizing and demonetizing education, where AIs will teach the son or daughter of a billionaire and the son or the daughter of the poorest person in India the same, right? Just like these devices give given all of us access to equal information, we're having access to equal education, equal healthcare in the final result. So we're going to start to see a lot of entrepreneurs. Your question as an entrepreneur is, how do I tap into them to partner with them? How do I use them? We're heading towards a massive crowdsourcing capability.
I was going to say crowdfunding is a
crowdfunding
step.
is huge, but it's like when I talk to entrepreneurs, I say, okay, what do you perceive as your limiting asset? Do you believe it's good ideas? If you do, you haven't asked the world for what ideas they want. Do you think your limiting resource is money? Bullshit. We're living in a world of, there was $15 billion in crowdfunding in 2015. It'll be tens of billions in the next few years, maybe $100 billion in 2020. So lots of crowdfunding, more angel, more venture, and now all of a sudden sovereign wealth funds are pouring money in. So capital is not your scarce resource anymore if you have a great idea. So maybe you have a great idea, maybe you don't. Maybe to iterate your idea, is it access to experts? Do you want access to a quantum physicist, a molecular biologist? You can find that through crowdsourcing. Right. So there is, honestly, the only limitation for an entrepreneur is your passion, your conviction on solving a problem. If you're, I've seen amazing entrepreneurs who have had, one amazing entrepreneur, Martine Rothblatt. She was the founder of XM Radio and Sirius Radio. Her daughter had a debilitating, life-limiting lung disease, and she knew nothing about biology, and she picked up a biology text and learned biology from high school forward, and ultimately built what is today an $8 billion biotech pharma and solved her daughter's disease and created a pharma that's now going to be regrowing organs for people, right? That's the passion of an entrepreneur. It's like, fuck this, I'm going to solve this problem. I don't care what it takes. That, if you've got that passion, then you have everything you need. Because that passion drives you to get access to everything and partner with 8 billion people out there. So I think we're going to become much more of an entrepreneurial planet. And so again, the world's biggest problems, the world's biggest business opportunities, become a billionaire by helping 1 billion people. That coalition for me gives me the greatest hope and aspirations.
Beautiful.
He wants to follow on here.
How might blockchain affect that from an infrastructural standpoint?
I think so the question is, how might blockchain affect that? I think all of these things are increasing agility. It's making things frictionless.
Speed, too.
Agility, speed, frictionless, costless. So we're going to get all these accelerants. And I think the thing is that most people don't realize how fast the world is changing today and how fast it's going to change. Right? We're going to see the world just hockey sticking in terms of, holy shit, I didn't know that was possible. Oh my God, that's not possible? Oh my, I want that. Oh, that person just solved this problem for me. Oh, wipe all this, let's go do that. And so it's more the issues of societal, we humans don't like change. And so, add on massive connectivity, not machine learning, but, neural nets on top of AI, add blockchain on top of that, add quantum computing, which we'll probably start seeing in the next 2 years coming online, changing pharmaceuticals and machine learning, all kinds of things. And oh my God, it's going to be an interesting world out there. And the problem is that the reaction to this rapidly changing world by government is, stop! Whoa, 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 stop. That you can't move that fast. Thank God the government wasn't paying attention when the internet came along. Otherwise, we wouldn't have what we have here. So how do we remain agile? Because we humans, whether it's culture, religion, family, government, like waking up in the morning and knowing that the world was the same as it was from the night before. We have the same job, the same rules, and so forth. When things are changing this rapidly, it causes us to fear.
Mass anxiety as well. Yeah.
And so my greatest concern for the future is not the Terminator. It is the mass anxiety from people losing their jobs, from technological unemployment. And so I'm spending a lot more time thinking about that. And there are solutions, but we need to change the conversation. This conversation needs to be taking place in a lot more places. So we're heading towards this world of abundance, and I believe that. There's no problem we can't solve. And a world in which we're going to meet the needs of every man, woman, and child on the planet. Everyone will have the best health care, the best education, the best access to energy, food, water, but it's the bridge to getting there. You know, Marcus, very kindly in an homage to my work, created X Prize's mission as building a bridge to abundance. And the same thing for Singularity University. So how do we bridge this next 20 years, 30 years to this new world that we're heading towards? And that's the danger zone. That's where I spend a lot of my time thinking.
I was going to say I was just having this conversation in the retail space. You know, if you've watched any headlines, JCPenney, Sears, I mean, they're all
Macy's, Kmart,
every one of them. But there's two that are staying fairly strong in data, which is the Nordstrom level and the Walmart. And everything in between is just becoming obsolete. And as this conversation, I think it's very relevant. You have those that are super AI and are all in and are moving in that direction, and we're having this conversation, but then we have this population that has been in a service-oriented business. They're the first to go. I mean, hamburger, like flipping a hamburger. I mean, that's going to be roboticized. Is that
no,
the right
I just saw a beautiful robot hamburger flipping device yesterday.
I mean, and as soon as one chain picks that up, it's over.
LinkedIn asked me to write a blog yesterday about about cashiers going away.
Right.
And there's so many implications, and of course that there's so many positions like those that will go away. And I have to ask the question: did people who are cashiers who appreciate their job now, is that what they wanted to do when they were kids?
Right, and that goes back to the conversation that you brought up just a minute ago of the AI and education. So to me, in this moment, this bridge, to me, the number one thing we have to focus on while we're focusing on creating all of this is how do we educate? How do we get mass education to the planet, to individuals who don't have access to this kind of conversation? Somebody in Wisconsin who has a dream, an idea, but doesn't understand the potential. How do we educate them so they don't become a anxiety victim, of this process? I'm not saying you have the answer for that, but that's where my mind has been as well for the last couple of years.
I'm partnering with Tony Robbins on this exact conversation because Tony really is plugged into human needs.
Yeah.
And the question is, how do we help fill and meet human needs when your job and what you've trained for and you're a third-generation coal miner or third-generation factory worker, and when those jobs go away, and I've got some interesting ideas, but we're going to have to figure that out quickly and change the conversation around that.
Right. And I think that is the thing that we need to have more conversation around. We had some questions over here.
Thank you for igniting this conversation. With cryptocurrency and blockchain and smart contracts, I was wondering about smart cities. And in terms of the future, about the possibility of decentralized governments and using cryptocurrency with blockchain and individuals interacting through smart contracts with each other and cities engaging in that, if that could be a possible future. And also, you touch upon entropy and Asimov, and I was wondering about if you read The Last Question, and if you believe that the simulation has a reboot.
Yeah, so let's take this in two questions. The first question is my thought about cryptocurrencies and blockchain and smart cities, and throw all those things together. So yes, of course, I think we have the ability to reinvent cities. And if you look at the numbers, we're very rapidly moving towards 50% of the world 50% of the world heading towards living in urban centers, but that's going to change because what's happening is instead of living in downtown LA, all of a sudden you're going to be able to spread out and commute via autonomous vehicle or autonomous VTOL and get someplace, live 100 miles away and still get into downtown for your work, your entertainment, or commute by VR into virtual workspaces. So the drivers that have driven us to like compact ourselves is going to change. That's an interesting point, and a lot of real estate developers need to like wake up to the fact that this is going to change the game for them. The challenge with physical cities reinventing themselves is that they're still inside of national governments, and national governments don't want to really give the cities that much control or allow the rules, because if you were in a greenfield situation and you were rebuilding a nation city-state, it's a hell of a lot easier. So the question is, how do you go into failing governments? I've talked in the government of Greece and Italy and smaller nation states and rebuild it from the bottom up, where there is no currency. It's just a digital currency. And so a dear friend of mine, Shervin Pishavar, who's the managing partner at Sherpa Ventures, he's the founding executive chairman at Hyperloop One. This is one of his passions. We've spent a lot of time talking about how you reinvent these cities and really make them much more vibrant. And there's some very good ideas that he has that I'm not at liberty to say. So let's go about the second question. Are we living in a simulation? And my answer is, without any question, yes. That I think 99.99999% we're living in a simulation. And I'll come back to why in a moment, but the question then is, if we are, if I know it to be, what does it change? It changes nothing. I don't change what I do. I don't.
So are we talking like Matrix similar?
Yeah, I mean, so here's the deal. As naive as we are technologically, and we're still at the very beginning of the game, I can clearly see how we are building in VR worlds hyper-real simulations with the limited computational power we have, and I can imagine in a few generations being able to take AIs and place them into a virtual world and let them evolve in this virtual world. And if I can see that, given the limited ability we have today, just 50 years from now, it's going to be 1 billion times better.
Well, even the things
and I think 1,000 years from now. And so if that's the case, honestly, in a universe of 14.5 billion years old, and we are living on a planet that's 4.5 billion years old, which means there was 10 billion years of evolution before us, I find it very hard to believe this isn't a simulation. Because, in fact, I think it's an nth generation simulation, a simulation within a simulation within a simulation within a simulation. And what's driving that, maybe it's a Monte Carlo simulation, which we're one of an infinite number of simulations running, and who gives a shit?
How many, did anyone go to TEDx LA? Was anyone in there? Yeah. But just to your point, some of the stuff that was shown there, just some of the AI and the digital technology that was on display 4 months ago in LA was enough to make you not even be able to comprehend the next 10 years, let alone 50. So there was another question back there.
Hi, thank you all so much for the conversation. There is a rich beauty and brilliance to the quality of thinking and the frequency that's being raised. It's really beautiful, and I just want to say thank you all. Thank everyone for being here, for showing up, for yourself, for your family, for our species. It's the potential that can be a seed to the expansion that we're able to take away is phenomenal. So I'm thanking you for that. Understanding everything you've said technologically, understanding everything you said in terms of the resource and the fact that we're in a simulation and fuck it, okay. How do we prepare our children to unplug privilege? and racism? How do we address that? Because
So how do we prepare our children, say again?
How do we prepare our children to unplug from racism? Because we're talking about, we're now in the fever pitch of the transition to all of what you're speaking about in the next 30 years. And so part of the grind is going to be the need to unplug civilization from the concept of racism. We got to start with our kids from the womb.
Yeah.
So how do we set up the platform for that transition? Because if we're going to autonomic cars, we're going to all these things you're talking about, we got to find a way not to fuck each other up. And this is a real thing, because where do we direct all the energy of, oh my God, I don't have a job anymore, oh my God, I don't have a need for the type of scarcity consciousness that feeds this type of self-destruction, our species. So what do we do about that? Is there a technology?
So it's a great question, and I think about that with my children a lot. And I think the bridge we're trying to build, I mentioned earlier that you and I are a collection of 10 trillion human cells. And I don't take a knife to my hand because that my arm, my heart, my liver, my kidneys, all different, if you would, species or different elements of me that make the diverse me are all part of my ecosystem, part of who I am. And I think ultimately, the more connected we get, the more I realize that your success means my success. And so as we head towards this meta-intelligence in the long run, as we are a collection of 8 billion people connected, the more you learn, the more you bring your uniqueness to this meta-intelligence, the richer my life is. And I heard Eric Schmidt talk about this at Davos a couple years ago. He said instead of having gone into Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran and spending billions of dollars dropping bombs and so forth, it would have been much better if we brought fiber optic cables and set up 5G networks there. Right? That radical transparency and communication. So there's a great book called The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker. And he writes about violence over the last millennium. And we actually today are living during the most peaceful time ever in human history. And you wouldn't know that watching the Crisis News Network or the constantly negative news network or whatever you want to call CNN. And it turns out that, during the Middle Ages, a tribe that might live 50 miles from you was considered by your tribe non-human, and therefore it was okay to kill them. And it was this dehumanization of people who even look like you, but were different from you because, they were in a different tribe. And so we have to recognize how far we have come. Not far enough, but this notion of radical transparency and hyperconnectivity. So my children are growing up in a very different world than I did, perhaps than you did, where I can see and learn and feel and hear about people from around the world. My responsibility, my wife and I's responsibility as parents are to expose those kids. So I think technology gives them eyes and ears and stories around the world that at a much higher frequency than it would have been possible just 30 years ago with just motion pictures and TV. So that's a good directionality. But I think it comes down to morals and ethics and memes.
The first thing I thought of was, in an X Prize sense, is the empathy project.
Yeah.
That's the first, to me, that's one of the most.
That's interesting, right? So a guy named, what's Jim at up at Stanford? Do you remember his name? The head of the Stanford VR lab. I'm blanking on his name. 1 second. He does work with VR and empathy. And so what he will do is he'll take me and he'll put some VR goggles on, I'll be looking in the mirror. I'll be a 50-odd-year-old white guy looking in the mirror in this view, and then I'll bend down, I'll look up, and I'm a 18-year-old black girl. And as I move my arms move, and I look myself in the mirror, and I all of a sudden see myself as that person. And I'll turn around, and I'll get some guy berating me, give me racial slurs, where the hell am I doing here, and so my ability now to do a transference and feel the empathy that that young woman might feel is a complete game changer, right? So there is the ability to use technology to do that.
And I think, and so that's why I brought that up, is I think that the first step in that is empathy. We have to understand. And there's, again, too much negative conversation and not real conversation. So, and I had another question back here.
I'll get you the name for that guy, and you should look up his work. Yeah.
Hi. So my passion is water.
I'm sorry. What is it? Yeah, his name is Jeremy Bailenson, B-A-I-L-E-S-O-N, and he runs the Stanford VR lab. And his whole focus is empathy, empathy in the workplace, empathy between cultures, and some great work. I apologize for the interruption. Your question, please.
So it's about water. So I think it's really interesting that water is the only 100% renewable resource that we have. All water goes through the water cycle and ends up back on Earth somewhere. And the only real barrier to getting clean, potable water to people who need it is the cost of transporting it and logistics. And yet somehow 67% of the world's population lives in areas that are water stressed or where they don't have good access to water. So in thinking about a bridge to abundance with that, I'm wondering about your thoughts about this, whether you think it'll be something like energy, where it's a more decentralized world where people, homeowners individually, will be looking at technologies like condensers to create their own water and using water recycling, or if it's going to be more of a municipal thing. For the first time in human history, this isn't the only time we've gone through supply shocks in various parts of the world, but we've always had to move the human settlements before. And now I'm wondering if you're seeing, like, if LA is going to have a giant pipeline coming down from the Arctic, or if it's going to be something else.
So good question. I think that, and I wrote about this in Abundance, and I've talked about this a lot, that an abundance of energy gives us an abundance of water. We live on a water planet. Just to be very clear, water is not scarce. It's just not in a usable form. And as I've said over and over again, technology takes that thing which was scarce and makes it abundant, right? So 2/3 of our water of the planet, we live on a blue planet, right? That's what that's what we call our planet, the blue planet, or the blue-green planet. 2/3 of our planet's covered with water, 97.5% is salt, 2% is ice, and we fight over 0.5% that's not evenly distributed. So a couple of things. One is we've just launched in India something called the Water Abundance X Prize. It's funded by the Tata Trust. And India has got enough humidity in the air throughout the nation that this is a prize for pulling the water out of the air and giving every family 20 liters of clean drinking water. All right, the distribution network is there. It's called sun and evaporation. We are looking at large-scale desal as well as an X Prize. We're looking at recycling in the home as an X Prize. So this is a solvable problem for sure, and technology can solve that. Israel has just put enough desal where it's net, it's getting, I think, almost, if not all, maybe more, it's becoming a net export of water from desal. So this is a solvable problem, and the recycling is an important part of it. One of the X Prizes we're looking at right now, the problem, if I tell you that your drinking water is coming from your toilet and your bath, you need to be sure that it's clean drinking water. And our ability to actually measure all of the ions and particles and so forth to know that that water is clean drinking water is expensive still. So to get us to full recycling, We need to create those sensor technologies that are continuous, instant, and cheap. And then once you do that, if I can look at my tap and know, yes, it's in the green, which means this water that's being recycled is as good as the water I buy, maybe it's even better because micronutrients are being added in, then I'm going to recycle it all. And so can we solve this problem? Yes, of course. And again, I just think that these are great problems for entrepreneurs to become billionaires while helping billions of people.
Next question.
So I was just going to say my company is called Buoy, and I'm going to win that X Prize.
Excellent. Thank you for doing that.
I want to bring it back to what you were talking about, us being a very young planet. When you look back in evolution, we get rid of what we don't need in our body, and scales and whatever else we don't need. And here we are carrying around this big brain, and a huge portion of it is gray matter. And I'm really curious as to what you think the potential is of that when we talk about the connective tissue. And my theory is at some point on a given Tuesday, something's going to spark in all of us, and we're going to have a huge ability to use the rest of our brain, and that potentially technology can be that connective tissue to spark whatever the pieces that isn't being used.
Well, listen, 100% of your brain is being used. Let's dismiss the only use 10% of your brain myth. I mean, you are using your brain. There's no part of your brain. You can start to use it for memorizing facts, as Jim will teach you in the work that he does, but your brain is being used. There's nothing conserved that is not being used. Eventually it goes away, like your appendix and so forth, but your brain, believe me, every inch of real estate is critical and being utilized. I think that we are, as I mentioned earlier, the expansion of your cognitive capacity to the cloud is the next quantum leap, which is an nearly infinite leap that, again, numerous billionaires are working on right now. I'll share with you an idea that Brian Johnson talks about. Well, actually, Neil Jacobstein, who's the head of AI at Singularity University, is a dear friend, talks about, I'm not worried about artificial intelligence, I'm worried about human stupidity. I love that. I love that.
That's a great one. I like that.
And then Brian talks about the notion that it's not about AI versus humans. It's about AI versus HI. In other words, human intelligence is a resource. Human intelligence is a resource. So when you go to a country, and a lot of countries that are poor in sub-Saharan Africa, where moms don't have the micronutrients when they're pregnant for their baby's brain to evolve properly, or when a young child doesn't have the micronutrients for their brain to grow properly, and you end up with a subnormal IQ child, that's a fucking travesty.
Yeah.
And that, for that country, is a travesty, because collective brain power of that nation is its future.
Right.
Hampton Creek, I'm a huge fan of Hampton Creek, has developed, for example, something called power porridge, which for a few pennies gives a child the food and nutrients it needs for the day, which is incredible. So kudos to the team there. But we also are going to see an arms race happening. We see an arms race today in AI, right? Google and Facebook and Amazon and Samsung and everybody is just investing massively in AI. But the next arms race is going to be HI. How do I increase your cognitive processing and memory capacity? And how does a nation increase that? And that ultimately evolves us to the next species.
When you bring that up, I don't remember the name of the company, but it was a problem that they saw in desert-based communities of getting immunization and nutrients to these villages. And it was simply that it wasn't about having them. Nonprofits would get them. There would be mission works. The transportation from airport to village, the heat was so intensive that by the time they got there, they were irrelevant. The antibiotics were destroyed, all these different things. So a company literally built a cellular thing that goes on the back of a camel. I think they were talking about it at XPride, or I mean at TEDxLA. Anyway, the point of that is that somebody saw this problem and came up with basically a high-tech cooler that transports all of these needed enrichments to these civilizations, and now they're starting to see the transformation of countries, as you said, this collective human intelligence coming online, simply because they didn't have access to the basic things that you guys in about an hour are going to go upstairs and eat. I mean, it's that kind of thinking, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's what transforms the planet, and that's the opportunity we have as entrepreneurs, and not complaining about systems not being there to assist us in that.
So it's the solving problems, and I was mentioning Marcus Shingles, who's earlier today, and Marcus just joined us. You'll be on later this afternoon.
Yeah, Peter, one of the things that I got to thank you for is, early on when you guys first started the X Prize, I was a lot younger, and it helped me realize that, I was always a fan of futurism and technology, but it was really plugging in the gaps. People see autonomous vehicles, and they think, oh, there's still cars from the 1980s and 1990s, but immediately I'm thinking, well, once you have a certain level of autonomous vehicles, car insurance rates are going to go through the roof, and humans won't be able to afford to drive places. And so that's going to be the lever that helps shift, the adoption. And you're right, we've got the opportunity to completely reshape our cities and reuse them. I make rideable technologies, these lightweight vehicles, and in the future with autonomous vehicles, we're going to have more access for public space. So it's the convergence of all these technologies coming together. We've talked about empathy. We've talked about compassion. We've talked around hive networking, neural links, things like that. But assuming those things come on board, assuming that in the future I can understand your concepts, your empathy, create a much deeper, richer connection. And we've been talking about challenges and problems the entire weekend. One of the biggest is government. You're a libertarian capitalist. I'm a libertarian futurist capitalist. And one of the biggest challenges I see is just they're slow. And the fact that we've created this culture where we think we need government, where if you read Murray Rothbard's Anatomy of the State, government needs people. That's the resource. So where do you see us going as a species in terms of living together cooperatively and reshaping this kind of core thing that we all think we're dependent on, which is government, but in actuality we shape it? So
I think your question is, what's the future of how we organize? What's the future of government? Interestingly enough, it's really hard these days to go and start your own country. I've thought about it a lot. It's one of my goals.
Charter cities.
No, it's hard to create a new national government where you can establish complete sovereignty and rules. There's seasteading, there's space. But I think where we're going to start to see this is in virtual worlds. I think we're going to end up having two citizenships. I am a US citizen, and then I'm able to actually join a virtual community of my friends, right? This is what Second Life in its earliest vision was part of. But it'll be independent of where I live, right? It used to be that where you were born
is where you were.
Where you were.
Yep.
You were stuck with those people, you were stuck with your job, you were stuck with your class of where you were, and that was it. Your world was, within 10 kilometers of your birthplace, and that was it. And now we can be mobile, but you can't go someplace and start life again, right? In the 1800s, if you fucked up on the East Coast, you could move to the West Coast, and you could start life again. And now your identity and your full history travels with you. I do think we're going to end up creating virtual communities where the people I love and care about and have the same, and so I've done this, right, in the of X Prize is my community, Singularity University is my community, Abundance 360 is community, Human Gathering, you create a community here. We are creating communities of people that have common interests and so forth, and we're going to live that in the virtual world, and we may create economies and governance and rules in the virtual space as well. And so when I think about the ability to experiment with laws, we're working on, Marcus is one of the areas of our 6 areas that perhaps Marcus will talk about later, is, one of our X Prizes is in the reinvention of democracy using blockchain. And so it might be that that kind of experimentation actually occurs in a virtual government first. And if it pans out, then...
That was my question, is if the virtual becomes way more exciting and then the reality, how do we bring, those are not virtual, how do we bring those two worlds together and not get stuck in a virtual society? Hypothetically, Instagram has given us a taste of how quickly we are attracted to false, how quickly we build a falseness around us. And it's very difficult, especially for women, also for men, but young girls, it's very difficult for them to step out of that. So, I mean, the average selfie takes 27 minutes to post right now. Yeah. So, I mean, just like, how do we prevent ourselves from going so deep into this virtual society because we want it, we want to have governments get out of our way, we want to have these worlds, and then yet bring that into, and I'm not saying you have to answer that in 42 seconds, but if you can.
So listen, I think the beautiful thing about the world we're living in today is that we're getting the ability to experiment. And it's really hard historically to experiment with governments. You would sort of new one every couple hundred years, and you'd see how that experiment worked, and then you'd have a revolution, and you have another experiment. I think we're going to have the ability to experiment with governmental system structures in the virtual world hundreds or billions of times faster.
And then take that experiment.
And find out and say, oh, this one really is working great. Let's implement this in the physical world. And that's just, I'm just trying to give people ways to think about the future.
Yeah. This has been an amazing conversation. I want to thank you. I'm so glad that it didn't take 3 glasses of wine to get you here. It was amazing. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.